All right. So off we go on to our next nice challenge. This is going to be specifically related to um, the a VPN issue. So this is the Cyber Defense Edition Systems Administration Challenge. On this challenge, as they've kind of gone through in the initial kind of meeting minutes, there is a point of sale system that utilizes a VPN to connect back to a MSP, a managed service provider. And that VPN is currently down, and they need to go through and configure it. So, this network topo is basically giving us a general idea of how everything's kind of configured and what we're working on. So, what they've outlined in this specific lab is that the Centipede point of sale system connected to Edge Router 1 there connects back over a VPN connection over to the external MSP. And so currently that VPN connection is down. So there's multiple different types of VPNs. This specific one that they're utilizing is a form called IPsec, IPsec. And IPsec is a pretty standard and very common VPN protocol. I'll try and create another quick little video kind of going over IPsec and how it works. But to give a kind of a broad overview, essentially what IPsec is kind of designed around is two phases. And I apologize. Have to draw everything with my mouse right now. One day I'll invest in a drawing pen. But the first couple things to kind of note is IPsec is divided into two kind of phases. There's phase 1, which is an establishment of a management tunnel, and then there's phase 2, where is the actual data that we're going to be sending across that tunnel. And to back up just a little bit, if you're not very familiar with a VPN, what a VPN essentially does for us is it creates a virtual or simulated connection between two endpoints across the public infrastructure, or rather known as the internet. So it creates a private connection between these two areas. In this case, we're creating a dedicated site-to-site VPN. So it's essentially the equivalent as if I'm running a cable from this one router here at the 12 network over to the other router on the 9 network. And they have a dedicated kind of private IP address between those two connections. So what a site-to-site VPN does for us is it provides 4 primary things. It provides confidentiality, so the encryption of our traffic, data integrity, it's doing hashing. This is specifically for IPsec. Peer authentication, where it utilizes a pre-shared key or a RSA digital key. And then it also incorporates another form, which is another kind of protection, which is known as anti-replay attack measures, which is really cool. So what it does for there is it uses a method called encapsulating security payload, or otherwise known as ESP headers. And essentially what that does is it tacks on a serial number onto each of the frames that goes through the devices across that VPN tunnel. And so if any of that traffic is intercepted by, say, someone trying to grab that traffic, the two routers that are participating in the IPsec tunnel will essentially look at it and go, okay, well, I've already received, frame number 5 with that serial number 5. And so if another frame comes in later and it says that it's on serial number 5 as well, I'm just going to ignore it because I've already processed that frame. So even if someone is able to capture it and decrypt it or try and inject their own type of information through it, it has an anti-replay feature built in, which is very cool. So really, how we're kind of looking at this when we're kind of going through this is in these two phases. The management phase, that's the initial phase, which is known as the IKE phase, the Internet Key Exchange, which is really a framework that allows these two devices to initially negotiate and authenticate between peers. So this is the initial authentication phase, where initial traffic, how we're going to communicate, how we're going to send traffic back and forth is done. And then after that's finished, then we have phase 2, where traffic actually is being sent back and forth. So hopefully that gives you kind of just a quick glance into kind of what we're doing. So in this traffic and in this lab, what we're doing is we are trying to fix that VPN going from the edge router up to the MSP. Now, the one thing to note that's a little challenging about this lab is we don't have access to the MSP side of things, their firewall. We only have access to our edge router. Now, fortunately, for a lot of this stuff, we don't need to worry too much about the actual ins and outs and how to configure an IPsec VPN, because it can be a little daunting. There's a lot that needs to be done specifically on the type of router that they give us right here. And so the type of router that they set up right is a virtual router known as VyOS, VyOS. So it's a great router if we typically were in lab. I have a whole bunch of other labs that we utilize that in class. So at least we'll get to play around with it a little bit right now. So what we are going to do is, if you go up to the actual challenge itself, we can see the different devices that we're going to be connecting into, and the primary one that we're going to be using is the Centipede router. Now, we don't need to connect into any other systems besides that. It's just the Centipede router overall. And once it gets up and running, you need to log in with your credentials, which is player 1, and our password, which is password123, all lowercase. And again, if you forget those credentials, you can find that on the main challenge underneath the challenge info. So what device we're in right now is we're in a Viata device, or VyOS, which is it's a Linux-based router, a virtual router that we can utilize, that we're utilizing here. So it's pretty cool. It's very much when you kind of look into this and you're kind of working with it, it's basically a hybrid of Cisco commands and Linux commands that are just kind of meshed together as a whole. So when a lot of what you know with working, say, with like the Cisco command line does directly translate to working with this device, and also it is Linux, so a lot of the Linux commands that you know also will translate to this device as well. So, yay. Another thing to kind of look at really quickly, and this is just a note, some of you may or may not have noticed that there is a little error message at the very bottom line that says init ID 2 responding too fast, disabled for 5 minutes. Don't worry about that. That error is pretty common with what we're working on. It's just annoying because it will pop up every couple minutes. Don't worry about it. So just press enter and it will go away until it bothers you a little bit later. So a couple things to kind of note when working with Viata is, again, it's very, very similar to the Cisco command line. So what we can kind of look at between the two areas is our initial phase. If we look at, say, Cisco, what I have right here is just a Cisco packet tracer open just on the command line, just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of where it's at. Let's make the font just a little bit bigger here. Hopefully that makes it a little easier to see. So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the initial starting place that we're at is the basic user exec mode, where we have no real privileges or anything like that. So in Cisco, we have to type in enable to move into our higher level next step, or enable mode. And it's very similar in, say, VyOS as well. So the kind of initial phase where we're in, our user exec mode that you can kind of think of it, is always seen by that little tilde and $ icon. And in here, it really has a lot of just show commands that we can utilize when we're kind of looking at systems. But if we wanted to actually move into configure, making changes to the device, we can move into it by using the configure command, and that'll move us forward. Now, if you ever kind of like, if you wanted to move back, we can say exit. So what's nice about this again is between, say, Cisco and ViOS, the show commands are pretty identical for what you can do, and same thing, if you don't know what to type after a specific command, you can always hit the question mark key and it will highlight a list of different commands that we can have. Now, the primary things to kind of note is that we are mostly just going to be looking at, say, the VPN, so we can say show VPN, and then we can look at our two primary things, or it has a kind of a list of things that we can look at. Now, there are two primary aspects that we want to look at. We have IKE and we have IPsec. So as I mentioned before in our kind of initial areas, our first phase is IKE. Our second phase is IPsec, which is the actual tunnel or data that we're sending. IKE is our management connection area. So if we wanted to look and check on the status of our specific tunnels, this can give us some good information. So we can look, look at show VPN IKE, and then we can look at what's known as SA, which is the security associations. It's really just a fancy way of saying who's my peer, who's my neighbor, is my tunnel connection up, are things all good? If you wanted to equate it to, say, a Cisco command, it's pretty similar to the show IP interface brief command, where it gives us a shorthand version of who am I connected to and what's currently up and running. So what's nice about this and what we can see in this command, so we have two primary tunnels that we're looking at, and based off of our topo, we can see that we have a tunnel going to our firewall, which is on our HQ, and then we also have another tunnel going to our external MSP. And we can see, and if we're looking at the IP addresses here, we can see that we have our peer ID is 172.168.2.2, our local is 2.3. Looking at our topo, we can see that 2.3 is the edge router, 2.2 is our HQ firewall, and 2.5 is the MSP. So the bottom peer ID, where it says 172.168.2.5, is the peer that we want to take a closer look at. And we can see that if we look at the state, our state is currently set to up. So that means it's functioning. Our tunnel is up and functioning. So what does that mean? Well, that means that phase 1, the IKE, the management tunnel, is functioning and working just fine. So that's good news. So what that means is we should now take a look and take a closer idea of, okay, well, what's the problem with, say, the IPsec tunnel? So again, we can take a closer look at our command. And another fun thing, just like with Linux or Cisco, you can use the up and down arrow keys to call prior commands. So we're going to look at the show VPN, and we're going to say look at the IPsec side of things. Didn't finish my command. And same thing, we're going to look at the security associations, which is the actual joint connection between the two sides. And from right here, we can see that our state is currently down. So that's a problem. So we need to take a closer look and figure out now, why is it down? So looking a little bit more in depth into things, we're going to go into our configuration mode. And a couple things that we can do, we can type in show right now, and what this will do is it will show us a huge amount of, it just shows you the full running config. This is essentially the equivalent of the show run command in Cisco. So I can press spacebar through a whole bunch of things, but what we really want to look at is we just want to look at the VPN settings, so we can just kind of fine-tune what the configs we want to look at by typing in show VPN. Now you'll see a lot of configurations that are set up here. So the way we read this is left to right, and as things are tabbed in, you can start to see what the sub commands actually are. So if we're looking at this very first thing, it's IPsec, ESP-group, ESP-1T, and then the compression disable is a command that goes underneath ESP-1T, or the specific group. I'm going to save you guys just a little bit of time here. We don't need to look at too much of this. What we want to start, because we can't see the MSP settings, I'll just go ahead and say there's nothing wrong with the current VPN settings themselves in terms of how our pre-shared keys are configured or anything along those lines. So you don't need to worry about, am I using the right Diffie-Hellman group? Am I using the right encryption of, say, AES-256? Am I using the right hashing of SHA-1? Is the lifetime connection between the two set correctly, which is basically a timeout? You don't need to worry about those things. What we do need to look at is the very common things that where things might start to break, which is if we have incorrect addresses set. So just like in normal networking, if you set an incorrect address on an interface, it's highly likely that you're not going to be able to establish connection, or if you route to the wrong area, there's likely going to be some issues. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what you have to do, but what you should look at is you need to start going through and looking at, say, the map and topology that's been provided to you, looking at, say, the configs that are actually there, and going, okay, are all the addresses actually set correctly on everything? And you need to identify what the addresses are and if things are properly set. And I'll tell you again, one other hint: there is only one thing that is wrong on this network in order to get the MSP up and functioning. So you only have to fix one thing in order to actually change it. So let's say that we were able to identify what that specific thing is, and we want to actually make that change. So to do this, if I'm going to be making changes on my device, again, we need to recognize kind of the flow of how things are going to be kind of configured. So we have show commands. If we take a look at a question mark, we can see the different commands that are available to us. So confirm, comment, commit, compare, copy, so on and so forth. But if you go down to the second from the bottom, so one up from show, we have the set command, which set the value of a parameter or create a new element. So if I want to make a change on a device, we use set, and then we can say, okay, well, what am I setting? What am I making a change to? We're going to be making a change to our VPN. What type of VPN am I using? Well, again, this is a IPsec VPN. And now it's going to go, okay, well, where or what device am I currently working on? Well, let's say I found the error underneath, say, site to site. And then it's going to ask, okay, well, if I do a question mark after site to site, there's only one possible completion, which is to type in the word peer. If I do a question mark again, it'll go, okay, well, what issue am I specifically seeing? And I can see, okay, well, there's I want to look at, this is the wrong address, don't actually look at this one, really. I want to look at 172.31 2.2, which, remember, 2.2 is going to the actual firewall itself. That's why I want to make a change to. And then if I take a closer look, it'll go, okay, well, what am I specifically changing? And it might be something along the lines of, I need to change, say, like the local address. And then it'll tell you, okay, well, tell me how you're going to complete it. So what's the local address? Or maybe I need to make a change on, say, the tunnel, on tunnel 1, and then it'll look at, I can, again, continue to step through that further. So if I look at this further, if I say show VPN IPsec site to site, and we look at our connections between the two, let's just take a look at there's actually two errors. Let's take a look at the peer between us and going to our internal network. And then remember that when we looked at the IPsec side of things, both IPsec tunnels were currently down. So if we're looking at, say, the 2.2 network range, we can start to see a couple different things. So we check to go, okay, what's the peer ID? It's set to 2.2, which is the correct based off our topo. The local address, which is the address our system, which is this router, is set to 31.2.3, which again, if we look at our topology, 172.31.2.3 is the correct address. We look at, say, the local prefix, which is 192.168.100.0/24, and the remote prefix, which is 172.16.30.0/24. Well, if we look at our network over here, we can see 30.0 is for all of our production systems, so /24, so that's correct. But then if I look over on this side, our Centipede point of sale system network range is 192.168.10.0/24. It's not 100, so that's a problem. So we're likely going to need to fix that. So if we were to go back to, say, like needing to make a change on that, we need to go to our set VPN IPsec site to site peer, specify the peer we want to look at, which is 172.31.2.2, tunnel 1, because that's where we want to make the change next, and then we're going to be changing the local prefix, which is our address. So we say tunnel 1 local prefix, and then we're going to change the IP address to be the correct range, which is 10.0/24. So now the next thing to do is, once I do that, if I look at my show command again, you can see that there's a little kind of caret pointing towards the prefix 10.0. That means, unlike Cisco, ViOS doesn't immediately apply your command, so we have to actually approve it. And to do that, we use the commit option. And then we also use the save function to save it to our NVRAM. So we're actually saving the config so that anytime this device reboots, it will actually have and store that command. So commit applies it to the current running config, save saves it to following configurations. So what we need to do next is we actually have to restart the VPN service in order for this specific command to also take place as well. So we can type exit, and then we can use the, again, if I don't know what to use, we can say do a question mark, and hey, down at the bottom you can see restart, which says restart a service. So we're going to restart, and we're going to specifically restart the VPN, and we just have to press enter, and it'll restart the IPsec process. And now this might take a few minutes for it to kind of go through, but if we say look at our show VPN IPsec SA again, hey, take a look. Now our tunnel between ourselves and the main HQ is now back up and operational. So that's a good sign. So those are the types of things that you kind of have to do and kind of look through. You don't need to go into a huge deep dive into understanding all the different configurations of the VPN configs or on the IPsec configuration side of things. Really, this is a networking problem. So you need to address what the IP addresses are, whether they're the correct ranges, and make sure that things line up correctly on here. And use the topo as your correct mark for kind of making these changes. So, and then commit the change once you want to apply it, save it, and then restart the VPN service in order for it to take hold. And you, again, can confirm whether that's working. If you want to take a closer look at, say, additional kinds of information, or want to read up a little bit more about IPsec, which I highly recommend that you do, I've provided a full Viata documentation guide. Viata and ViOS are the exact same thing. Viata is just a little bit older. They were purchased by another company, and Viata turned into ViOS. But the documentation is the same. It hasn't been updated. The commands are the same, so you don't need to worry about that. So in this documentation, there is a, down at the very bottom, there is a PDF called Viata VPN 6.5, and in chapter 2 of this documentation is a whole chapter on IPsec site-to-site VPNs, how they work, all their configuration, what you need to do, talks about phase 1, phase 2, talks about the keys, talks about hashing, encryption ciphers. It is great. Highly recommend that you take a read. I will try and post another quick video on this as well, but wanted to provide that information to you now if you wanted to go through and do a little bit of reading. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Gave you a little bit of what you needed to know in order to kind of go through this. If you do have questions, feel free to reach out at any point in time. Thanks. Good luck.